Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. As we are all students of history, in particular for many, if not most of us, of the Tudor period, I think we've all probably come to realise that opposing the monarch, especially if that monarch was Henry VIII, tended not to do wonders for a person's health. As today's video is going to be going live in March, which is Women's History Month, I think it's time for us to take a look at a lady who did just that. Challenged King Henry VIII and paid the price. But before we take a look at today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to History Hit for sponsoring another video on this channel. And as this month, March, is Women's History Month, it felt especially fitting that I got the chance to immerse myself in the story of Boudica and her revolt.
Archaeologists are discovering actual physical evidence of Boudica's assault, including stunning artefacts, revealing the sheer brutality of her onslaught.
For glass to liquefy, you are talking intense flame, unprecedented level of destruction.
I've set out to discover what archaeology can tell us about Boudica's infamous assault on Colchester, a tumultuous event that turned the capital of Roman Britain to ash.
I found this programme utterly fascinating, and I'm sure you will as well. History Hit brings you the stories that shape the world through their award-winning online history channel and podcast network. It's like Netflix, but it's all history. Watch hundreds of hours of original history documentaries anywhere, anytime, on any device. Brought to you by expert historians such as Dan Snow, Professor Susanna Lipscomb, Dan Jones, and more. And as well as already having hundreds of expert-led programmes, they add 2 more every week. Click the link in my description box to find out more and to subscribe to History Hit. As an added bonus, History Hit are offering my viewers a very special discount. If you use the code READINGTHEPAST30, you can get 30% off of an annual subscription. Thanks again to History Hit for sponsoring this video. Let's take a look at Elizabeth Barton, also known as the Holy Maid of Kent. In 1525, a young woman, Elizabeth Barton, who at that point was likely only in her very late teens, reportedly fell ill for several months. The affliction was a most concerning one that made it difficult, if not impossible, for her to eat and drink. Years later, in around 1533, this illness would be described as, quote, an impostume. This refers to a swelling that may have been an abscess in her stomach, which diverse times redounded upwards to her throat and was like to stop her breath. Despite seemingly going months without proper sustenance, she miraculously did not starve, nor did she dehydrate to a fatal point. But the miracles did not stop at her mere survival. Her other reported symptoms included seizures, contortions of her face and body, paralysis, and delirium. And accompanying these symptoms was an apparently new ability, or rather power. Barton had become a prophetess. Early in her illness, as she lay in the sick room that was at that time being shared by a child, Barton correctly predicted that that child would die. As time went on, Diane Watt describes how, quote, during her death-like trances, she made various pronouncements on matters of religion, such as the 7 deadly sins, the 10 commandments, and the nature of heaven, hell, and purgatory. She spoke about the importance of the Mass, pilgrimage, confession to priests, and prayer to the Virgin and the saints, had revelations concerning the souls of the dead, and saw visions of heaven, where St. Michael weighed souls, and where St. Peter carried the keys. All of this represented a fairly standard, even acceptable form of religiously inspired behaviour that might be found among numerous prophetesses from late medieval or pre-Reformation England. We do know very little about Barton's early life before her illness was first reported in 1525, but it is thought that she had little access to education, and that therefore she was most likely to be illiterate. The sick room in which her symptoms first manifested was in the household of one Thomas Cobb, who had employed Barton to act as a servant. Thomas Cobb managed the farm that belonged to the then Archbishop of Canterbury, William Warham. This farm was at Goldwell House in Aldington in Kent. As Barton's condition, and the apparently superhuman skills it brought with it, became apparent, her parish priest, Richard Master, naturally became aware of what was going on. He then contacted William Warham, who in turn wrote of his hope that if she were to make more speeches and prophecies, that, quote, he should be at them, as nigh as he could, and mark them well. Warham also arranged for her to be observed, questioned, and investigated by an ecclesiastical commission, which he put together and then sent to her for the purpose. They found her to be genuinely inspired, appropriately devout, and conventional in the expression of her faith. At least, she was conventional by the standards of England in the mid-1520s, because, as we all know, not long after this period, the matter and manner of religion is going to change quite substantially. The sources then vary slightly with regard to what happened next, or rather about what the ultimate outcome was. It is said that Barton announced in 1526 that she would be miraculously cured if she was allowed to visit the nearby Marian shrine at the chapel of Our Lady at Quarter Street. Many accounts record that this miracle in fact happened before an audience of a couple of thousand people, including those commissioners that had been sent to assess her. However, at least one other account has Barton needing to make frequent visits to this shrine, hoping for God's promised cure, but finding that that cure was in fact delayed. In this second version, of course, Barton would continue to experience the painful symptoms of her illness, in addition to those semi-conscious trances that had accompanied it. Whatever the state of her health might have been, Barton also proclaimed that God had told her that it was his will that she become a nun, and that Edward Bocking, who was a Benedictine monk, in addition to being a member of that commission that Warham had sent to examine Barton, apparently God had said that he should be her spiritual advisor and confessor. Thus, Barton entered the Benedictine priory of St. Sepulchre, Canterbury, soon after this. She took her holy vows by the summer of 1527. William Warham approved Bocking to act as Barton's spiritual father, and he also wrote to King Henry VIII to share her revelations with him. The king, in turn, asked for Thomas More's opinion on the account. Moore responded, quote, that in good faith I found nothing in these words that I could anything regard or esteem. For, saving that some part fell in rhyme, and that, God wot, full rude, else for any reason, God wot, that I saw therein a right simple woman might, in my mind, speak it of her own wit well enough. Nevertheless, Barton's fame spread, and it drew people from all walks of life to her. Some came in search of her spiritual advice. Others wanted to seek her divine intercession for themselves or for those they cared for, while an elite few wished to see if they could interview her for themselves. William Warham in particular took up and promoted her miraculous abilities and divine inspiration. He promoted her to John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, and also to Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. The latter of these even met with her on more than one occasion, and is thought likely to be the person who opened up the proverbial door that allowed her to talk with King Henry VIII himself in person about her visions and revelations. Barton's ever-increasing prominence would no doubt have been celebrated and indeed encouraged by most, if not all, of the Benedictine community that she belonged to. And this would have been because the public interest that was generated in her would naturally translate into a financial windfall for her community. This would come in the form of donations, perhaps direct payments for spiritual services and/or patronage for the order to which she now belonged. Still, as I think is perhaps always the case, there are going to be those who are doubtful. There certainly were those who questioned Barton's assertions and indeed her character. In 1530, William Tyndale, that famed Bible translator and leading figure of the reforming movement, would denounce Barton as a, quote, false, dissembling harlot. At around the same time as all this was going on, Henry VIII's great matter was unfolding, and Barton's revelations increasingly focused on the danger of the king continuing down the path that he had now started to tread. Indeed, she asserted that she had seen that if this king, quote, proceeded to the accomplishment of the said divorce and married another, that then his majesty should not be king of this realm by the space of 1 month after, and in the reputation of God should not be king 1 day nor 1 hour. When she was asked, quote, what danger the king should be in if he did marry, she answered that he should not live 6 months after, whereof she said she had sure knowledge by revelation. She threatened that God's wrath would be brought against William Warham and Thomas Wolsey if they chose to fall in line with the king's desires. Additionally, in October 1532, she announced that she had had a divinely inspired vision that had shown King Henry VIII being excommunicated on account of his refusal to set Anne Boleyn and his plans for an annulment aside, and of his refusal to return to Catherine of Aragon. In all of this, Barton has spoken of an ecclesiastical censure that could, by rights, be used as an argument to justify depriving Henry of his throne. This was seditious, potentially an inspiration for rebellion. Technically, she's also imagining the king's death, which was treason. In 1533, an apparently concerned Thomas More met with Barton at Sion. More would report that this meeting gave him, quote, a great good opinion of her. Nevertheless, he would also send Barton a message that she should, in future, avoid discussing with laypersons, quote, any such manner things as pertain to princes' affairs or the state of the realm. Later in the same year, 1533, England would see the consecration of a new Archbishop of Canterbury, following the death of William Warham. His replacement was the reformer Thomas Cranmer. Cranmer had been appointed in the last months of 1532. Then, in the May of 1533, from this new position, Cranmer ruled finally on Henry's great matter. He judged that Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was null and void, before proclaiming that his marriage to Anne Boleyn was both true and valid. Cranmer had concerns about Barton, especially considering the fact that, quote, many learned men, but especially diverse and many religious men, had great confidence in her, and often resorted unto her and communed with her, to the intent that they might by her know the will of God, and chiefly concerning the king's marriage, the great heresies and schisms within the realms, and the taking away of the liberties of the church. Make no mistake, Barton's influence was, frankly, dangerously far-reaching. Numerous high-profile religious houses supported her and indeed turned to her for guidance, as did vast swathes of the laity coming from all ranks of society. Barton, or those working on her behalf and in her name, even wrote to the Pope to ask for him specifically to act against Henry. Gertrude Courtenay, Marchioness of Exeter, who was the wife of Henry VIII's own cousin, in addition to being a close friend of Catherine of Aragon, made the effort to travel in disguise to meet with Barton. Then she also brought her to the Courtenay house at West Horsley in Surrey, where Barton reportedly experienced a trance or vision. Beyond this, there were books published that detailed her miracles and prophecies. Eventually, it seems that enough was enough. Barton was summoned to stand before Cranmer for questioning in August 1533. On this occasion, though, she was released without charge. Next up, she would face questioning by Thomas Cromwell. At the end of September, Barton's spiritual advisor Edward Bocking was arrested, and his rooms were searched. Cromwell then sent for Richard Master, that parish priest from Kent who had first drawn William Warham's attention to Barton. The matter was then, unsurprisingly, rigorously investigated. Elizabeth Barton herself was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London in the November of 1533. She was then subjected to the investigation of the council until finally, on November the 16th, 1533, she confessed herself to be both a traitor and a heretic. But despite this, despite her arrest, her imprisonment, and now her confession, Barton, or at least those working on her behalf and in her name, sent out secret messages to all those who had followed and supported her, and these messages informed them that her confession and retraction had been divinely ordered, that it was still part of the plan. And so perhaps there were some that continued to believe in her, at least for the time being. On November the 23rd, 1533, Barton and her chief adherents did public penance at Paul's Cross in London. At this time, their crimes were detailed before the public, and Barton was also required to make her public confession. 2 weeks later, there would be a repeat performance of all of this at Canterbury. With this public recantation, any remaining support that she had began to melt away. The king started to receive grovelling letters from all those who had supported this nun of Kent, and who now desperately wished to be forgiven by him. Henry and his government were clearly keen to send a message, and so, in March 1534, Elizabeth Barton, Edward Bocking and Richard Master, along with John Dering, who was another monk of Christ Church, Canterbury, Hugh Rich, who was the warden of Richmond Priory, Henry Risby, who was the warden of Greyfriars, Canterbury, and Henry Gold, who was the parson of St Mary Aldermary in London, and also the former chaplain to Warham, were all indicted of high treason by Act of Attainder. Even Thomas More was almost named in this bill too, due to his connection with Barton. But he managed to defend himself, and so, luckily for him, his name was removed on this occasion. John Fisher would not be so fortunate. Instead, he would be attainted for misprison and concealment of treason, alongside two laymen. This was Edward Thwaites and Thomas Gold, who was the brother of the Henry that was mentioned a moment ago. Also indicted of this crime was Thomas Lawrence, register to the Archdeacon of Canterbury. John Addison, who was Fisher's chaplain, and also Thomas Abel. He was the chaplain to Catherine of Aragon. Additionally, this Act of Attainder required members of the public to hand over any texts they might have which reported on the prophecies and miracles of Barton and her sect. Any person who was found to have failed to have done so risked being fined and imprisoned. Richard Master, the parish priest, would obtain a reprieve, but for all the others that were convicted of high treason alongside him, the outcome would be devastatingly different. On April the 20th, 1534, Elizabeth Barton, Edward Bocking, John Dering, Hugh Rich, Henry Risby, and Henry Gold were drawn from the Tower to Tyburn, and there hanged and beheaded. Their heads were then displayed as a warning to others. Elizabeth Barton's head went on London Bridge. The others' heads were placed on various gates around the city. I'd like to return to Diane Watt, because she points out that, quote, Barton has been variously characterised as a charlatan, an impresario, a puppet, a hysteric, and a naive and innocent victim. Those who were responsible for the suppression of her prophecies and for her condemnation and death represented her as a cunning, greedy, and sexually immoral hypocrite. Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall, and I'm referring here to both the novel and the TV adaptation of it, features the story of Elizabeth Barton. In both the versions, both text and on screen, I see Barton as being presented as a proud, haughty, even greedy person. An individual who knew that she was being deceptive all along and did so in order to gain fame and to enjoy the prestige and wealth that fame brought. Ultimately, though, Mantel shows us that she cracks and confesses as much. For John Salcott, Bishop of Bangor and Abbot of Hyde, the individual who was selected to preach a sermon while Barton and her followers did their public penance, she was a hypocrite. He called her as much in that sermon. She, he claimed, demanded that her followers would, quote, fast so much that the sharpness of their bones had almost worn through their body, while she deprived herself of nothing whatsoever. Further to this, Salcott presents her as being merely a tool in the traitorous schemes of a conservative faith faction who apparently had the sole aim of undermining King Henry VIII and attempting to deny and remove his rightful authority. But what do you think of the way that history has remembered Elizabeth Barton? Was she a conwoman, a deceptive pawn in the treason of others? Was she a heretic who enjoyed the attention? Was she a true believer, forced to confess otherwise in fear of the threats that were being made against her by powerful men? Or could something else have been at play? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. Or you can come and find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do consider following me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. And if you did, why not share it with some friends? If you like my channel, in fact, please do let your pals know about it. And if you like this video, do let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please also subscribe to the channel. And if you think you're subscribed, and I know I say this every week, now is the perfect time. Just have a little check. Make sure that you are still subscribed and that YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you. While you're there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then also select all in the drop-down menu that's going to appear so that allegedly YouTube will tell you when I've next uploaded or indeed when I'm about to go live. I do hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.